Jeff Boggs here. We are, in this video, going to talk about the literature review assignment. My assumption is that you have already looked at the instruction sheet and the rubric to get a sense of what you're expected to do. And with that in mind, I'll proceed to talk a bit more about specific points. One of the things I want to do in this video is just reiterate the difference between literature reviews and annotated bibliographies. Your first assignment was an annotated bibliography, and you're using that as the raw material to write a literature review. So if we think about the purpose of an annotated bibliography, it is to provide a systematic summary of individual texts that are related to your research question. So you identified 8 texts, 8 empirically focused peer-reviewed journal articles, and you've summarized each of those in a systematic fashion. So you had your 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph contained particular bits of information. So you have analyzed each of those sources, which is useful, and I'll show you how that's useful in a little bit. However, an annotated bibliography is not a literature review. A literature review is a systematic synthesis of the most important themes in these texts that you have found in your annotated bibliography, or that you used in writing your annotated bibliography. So one way to think about this is that an annotated bibliography, it's almost like a laundry list. So you tell your reader for each of your sources what you found. So for source A, then for source B, and then for source C, and so on. A literature review should not read like a laundry list. And I will discuss some practices that might help you avoid that. So again, keeping with the theme, a literature review. So keeping with the theme, a literature review is not an annotated bibliography. Now, you might get sick of hearing me say this. The reason I say this is that in years of teaching this stuff, I find that it's really useful to reiterate this point so that it sinks in. Because if I say it once, I'll still get a lot of annotated bibliographies for my lit review. I don't want to see that. I want to see you do this the right way. So an annotated bibliography is basically the raw material for your lit review. You've taken each of those sources, you've analyzed them, so you've broken them down into different parts. So your first paragraph, you've identified spickered 6 steps as they pertain to your source. Your second paragraph, you talk about the main findings and the limitations. And in your third paragraph, you explain the relevance of this source to your research question, or to your provisional research question, because you are allowed, if you so desire, to change your research question, so perhaps to focus it more. So the annotated bibliography, it provides raw material. From this raw material, so from your annotated bibliography, you will identify 3 themes. So you will sort this raw material into what you think are the 3 most important themes that your reader needs to know about in not just your literature review, but also probably for your research proposal, though you are allowed in your research proposal to change your themes. And so these themes by identifying 3 themes that allows you to compare and contrast the different authors' positions. So you identify these 3 themes in order to compare, so identify similarities, but then also contrast, so identify differences between these different authors' positions, as well as how they conducted their research. And by doing this, we can hopefully identify gaps in the literature, which is basically a fancy way of saying identify something that someone has not investigated before. Though for the purposes of this course, I'm not expecting you to find, major gaps in the literature. So don't get too hung up on that. But the reason that we write a literature review is to identify gaps in the literature, and then hopefully our research question, when we answer that research question, it will help fill in one of these gaps in our knowledge. At this point, I find a fair number of students find themselves stuck on their literature review. And mainly, they're stuck in that they are unsure as to how to find themes that they could identify in their literature review. I am going to show you a technique for finding themes. And it involves analyzing your annotated bibliography entries by using a table to help you first identify similarities and differences in this literature that you've reviewed. And so remember from the first week on the Sakai site, the first week for 2P21, there's a bit about what analysis means. There's a picture of a bicycle being broken down into parts. So to analyze means to reduce a thing into its parts, into its constituent components. And you've actually already begun the analysis of these sources when you wrote your annotated bibliography, because you identified the material for those 3 paragraphs. And that you've systematically, for each article, had a first paragraph in which you identified Spickard's 6 steps and how those pertain to your article. In your second paragraph, you identified the main findings as well as limitations of that particular source. And in the third paragraph, you identified you explained how that particular source, how you thought it might relate back to your research question and to Peterborough. And then you also, for each source, came up with some number of keywords. So here we have a table in which we have the material that you wrote in your first paragraph right up here. Oh, hold on. You may not be able to see me wiggle my mouse around on here. So we have, up here, we've got our first paragraph. You've got your research question, your logical structure, your data type, how you collected the data, or not how you did, how the author of that article that you read, of that source, collected the data, the site where they collected the data, how they sampled, and the methods they used to analyze their data to come up with an answer for the research question. So this was all what went into the first paragraph. In your second paragraph, you had the main findings and the limitations. And in your third paragraph, let me come over here. So in our third paragraph, you explained the relevance, as you saw it, of this article to Peterborough, I think I left out a U in there, oh well. And then also you explained the relevance of this source to your research question. So that is all material that you have already collected for your annotated bibliography. And my recommendation then is to build a table. Not that you can see it all that well. There should be like lines there as well, etc. And then in alphabetical order, include your sources. And this only works if your sources are peer-reviewed, empirical journal articles. That's why I wanted you to all use empirical, peer-reviewed journal articles. And once you lay this out, then you can start to see similarities. So maybe you'll notice that, some of your sources had identical or very similar research questions, or that they used a particular kind of data, or they collected data in a particular way, or that their findings, tended to come down on one side or the other of a particular position, that maybe all of them addressed particular kinds of limitations, or maybe they were all relevant in one of three ways to Peterborough. But once you populate a table like this, then you can start, and I would recommend just doing it on paper, just kind of sketch in there, briefly your responses. And this helps you sort of start to make sense, and it makes it easy for you then to compare similarities and differences in your sources, which then can help you find your themes. So in addition to developing a table with these categories across the top, you might also add, if it makes sense, something about models. If a lot of your sources talked about particular models or theories, possibly keywords that could be potentially useful to help you sort of pull together your themes, but I would focus more on models and theories more so than keywords. The policy implications, so what are the real world implications of this research that you looked at, or even often sources will suggest future avenues of research. And so between all of these different kinds of categories, so with models, for instance, and the benefit of arranging your entries like this makes it easier to do a number of things. And I recommend that you literally do this. You make this blanking table and you populate it with your entries, because it will make your life so much easier, right? And if I run into people who are having problems on the second assignment and need extensions, I'm going to ask to see your tables. So if you don't have your tables pulled together, that would suggest to me that you've just sort of, sorry, I'm going to sound like someone's dad right now. So yeah, if you need an extension, I would like to see your tables before you go on. So customarily, I won't need your tables. But if you want an extension, then I'm going to need to see your tables. Okay. So when you arrange your entries like this, it makes it easier to see themes. So themes are, oh Christ, they're themes. They're things that frequently occur in your literature. It allows us to see similarities and differences within themes. So we might find that, in literature on, let's go with dog parks, that that the literature on dog parks tends to focus on kind of one of three areas. So the first is how dog parks are a source, or not a source, are a site of social interaction for the humans that happen to own the dogs or are owned by the dogs, depending on your point of view. So that could be, one of the things that we notice in that literature. Another could be that dog parks, tend to be found in areas, or areas or locations where people's relationships to animals are that animals, if humans relate to animals, they tend to relate to them as companions as opposed to food or as sort of assistants when, so like in the case of working dogs, right? Or horses that pull plows or things like that, or oxen that pull carts, right? And then maybe the third theme, or not the theme so much, but within this theme of the kind of general topics that get discussed in the research on dog parks, maybe the third common feature that keeps popping up within that one theme is that there's a lot of, for lack of better words, conflict around dog parks. So you have the pro-dog people and the anti-dog people, right? So all of that could fit into one theme that examined, I guess the current state of how dog parks are, understood as an object of analysis. Okay, and then you will also synthesize and paraphrase. So synthesize, and I notice that a lot of people have a difficult time with this, and it's just, I think, that people need practice. But paraphrasing as well can help us synthesize. So paraphrasing, remember, involves restating in your own words what a particular author or authors have said. And to synthesize is to draw together the ideas of multiple authors, and in both cases, then you need to cite appropriately. We'll talk a bit about that. So when you make this table, because I know you're all going to be good and listen to me and make this table, I do not want to see it pasted into your literature review. That's kind of your own work, your own notes. So let me leave it at that. I have taught an assignment like this for some number of years now, and in this time, I've noticed kind of a common set of problems that emerge as students write literature reviews. And there's 6 problems that keep recurring every year because I always have a new batch of students, right? So if I had the same students all the time, I would expect that over time they would learn from their old mistakes and their old experiences and then go on to make new mistakes and do more wonderful things, right? Because you know that you're progressing when you are making new mistakes and not repeating old mistakes. However, because I only have students for a couple of years, I always tend to just see sort of the same crop, or like people in their early 20s, not always, but frequently in their early 20s coming in. And there are, over the years, I've noticed a lot of specific problems that they keep happening year in and year out. So I want to say a bit about those so we can try to avoid those. So the first is that students will often confuse an annotated bibliography with the literature review. This happens so much that whenever I teach now annotated bibliographies and literature reviews, I try to make really clear that they are different things and they structurally look different. So literally the way they're written is different. Another common problem is the failure to synthesize themes, a lack of sentence transitions, lack of paragraph transitions, something that some authors I like refer to as the closet cliche syndrome. And then there's another thing that those same authors refer to as the hit and run quotations. So, and I will go through these. I have a slide on each of these. But as you are writing your literature review, keep these common problems in mind and try to avoid them. So the first problem is that students will confuse an annotated bibliography for a lit review. An annotated bibliography is the fodder for a literature review. Each entry in an annotated bibliography is basically a list of what you found in that corresponding source, right? And it's that you've looked at sources and then sort of taken them apart, you've analyzed them in the same way, assuming that all your sources were empirical peer-reviewed journal articles. So that is not a literature review. The second problem I see is a failure to synthesize sources. So a literature review synthesizes its sources around themes. This is why I want you to make one of those blasted tables, because that will help you start to see themes. So a literature review is not a laundry list of what each source said. Instead, it compares and contrasts both the similarities and differences among the sources. And for the week 5 lab, we usually have an activity that will allow you to view basically bad and better literature reviews or excerpts from literature reviews. And in the bad examples, there tends to be, one of the problems is a failure to synthesize. A problem that I see that is actually not just a problem that I see in literature reviews, but more broadly in people's writing, is problems with sentence transitions. So a sentence transition allows us to link the material or the content in sentence A to sentence B in a meaningful way so that we understand how sentence A relates to sentence B. Here is an example that isn't particularly scholarly, but might be useful. So it might be useful because it's such a dorky, silly example. So we have here that the dog played music, right? Oh, hold on here. Yeah, so the dog played music. The music was loud. So here we have, in this sentence, basically a first part and a second part. And in this sentence, we have a first part, so the music was loud, and a second part. So the music was loud. So loud then appears here. And granted, these are very simple sentence structures, but it helps illustrate what we mean by transitions. So in this third sentence, then the loudness shook the walls. And then we have the walls collapsed. So, we have that linkage there. So, and in this case, then here collapsed. So the walls collapsed. This brought the fire department. This is a definite article that refers back to collapsed. So this refers to the state of the walls having just collapsed, right? So you might think of it as this refers back to this event of the walls collapsing. So this brought the fire department. The fire department called the dog catcher because, after all, the dog played music so loud that walls fell in, right? So the fire department called the dog catcher. And then here we've got the dog catcher apprehended the musical hound. So this gives you an idea of what I mean by sentence transitions, in that, it's clear that this sentence, that the first sentence relates to the second sentence, the second relates to the third to the fourth to the fifth. So most of the time, if you have a problem with this, it can be helpful to literally, this is a technique I learned from my wife, who has taught a lot of writing over the years. So, there we've got part A. So the dog played, or the dog, and then over here, somewhere over here, we've got a B. So the music, B was loud. So C, so the loudness. So C connects over here to D. The loudness shook the walls. So shook the walls, or the walls might be then the second part. So this then goes, so walls are referred to here and here. And in this example, in almost all of the cases, I have the kinds of linkages that I've made have involved just reusing the word from the previous sentence. Over here, so the walls collapsed, so F and G, so G then connects to H. So this example here where I have this, let me see if I can get a color around here, a little bit wider. So, and this is a problem that I see more generally, so not just in the case of literature reviews. So paragraph transitions are in some ways similar to sentence transitions in that you need to have some kind of linkage from one as you travel from one paragraph to the next. Hold on. So we want to make sure that the first paragraph, or paragraph A, links to paragraph B. Here's an example. So we have the dog catcher apprehended the musical hound. That is how the last paragraph ended, right? So we might think of that last paragraph as dealing with the effects of a musical hound. So the paragraph then ended with the dog catcher apprehended the musical hound. And to make this connection between paragraph A and paragraph B, in paragraph B, then I have shortly thereafter, so that suggests that some time has passed, right? The dog was thrown into a holding cell. So this dog's probably anthropomorphic because usually a dog would be thrown, well, I guess maybe dog catchers put dogs in holding cells. So anyway, so the dog was thrown into a holding cell. And then within this paragraph, then we make sure that each of the sentences are kind of linked together as well. And so thrown into a holding cell, the cell contained a shifty-looking ferret and a scruffy cat. And then we go on to say more in that paragraph about the dog's experience in the holding cell. Someday I'll write the rest of this story. But for now, we'll leave it at that. These last two that I'm going to show you come from a book by Graff and Birkenstein called, I think it's I Say, They Say, which is a nice little book that helps people develop their writing skills. And in the past, I've assigned it to students, but I haven't this year. Anyway, what they mean by a closet cliche syndrome is this happens when you mistake a writer's use of a cliche, especially when they're being sarcastic, for what they actually mean. And more generally, this happens when you argue that the writer is taking a particular position and they're often not taking that position. So it can happen when people do a, dare I say, half-assed job reading the material and understanding what the writer was communicating. So it happens generally when you think the author means one thing and they actually mean the opposite. So if you are like me, a very literal-minded person, it can also be that you just don't pick up on cliches because they go over your head. That's a different issue. And so the solution, so the way that you prevent a closet cliche syndrome is that you read carefully to ensure the author means what you think they mean. And here, this is Graf and Birkenstein, they say, I say. And you may well be able to find copies of this through the Brock Library. And it's an excellent little book. Graf and Birkenstein also talk about something they call the hit and run quotation. And this is something that I see frequently. And it refers to quotations that are dropped into a paper with no context or explanation of their relevance to your project or your thesis or anything. So there's just a quotation that's dropped in there, and as a reader, I am unclear as to why it's there or what it means. It might be perfectly clear in your head when you wrote it, but as a reader, I'm asking myself, what on earth is this doing here? And so a solution to this is that if you have a quotation, is that you sandwich it between its context, so on the top, and then its meaning for your work underneath that, so that literally it would take the form of, let me get some red here. Oh, that's the wrong color or the wrong size. Let's go here. So that, no, fiddlesticks. Here, okay. So you sandwich this quotation between its context, so you would have, something about, for example, numerous scholars note that dog parks are a site of human romance. So if you know single people that own dogs, there's a good chance that they probably dated people that go to their dog park, or have certainly considered it or flirted with people, right? Okay, so here we've got, numerous scholars note that dog parks are a site of human romance, and we might even go ahead and put, some of those scholars in there. So maybe Barksky 2013 talks about that. Woofers 2017, maybe, I need something. We'll say Zed 2001. And so here we've got, numerous scholars note that dog parks are a site of human romance. And we've got 3 authors that actually point that out. And then right under this, then you would have an indent. Well, actually, that's only for really big quotes. So you might say something like, hold on, let me go back here. So then the next sentence, so actually we could even start it over here. Maybe you've got a quote that 2 out of, and then I'm going to continue it back over here, 2 out of 5 dog park users reported that the dog park was more effective Then, online dating services. For finding a potential, we'll say love interest. And then, if that was, let's say that was Woofers. What year did I say? Woofers 2017. And then I've got their page number. So I'm using the system where you use a colon to indicate the page number because it's a direct quote. Let's say that was on page 88. And then I would then explain a bit more what this means. So, maybe even something like this. Let's write it kind of up here. So this suggests dog parks are an important locale for blah, 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 for something, right? But this, a hit and run quotation, would be a quotation in which you're telling me about what you found out about dog parks, and you just drop in there basically everything from here. 2 out of 5 dog park users reported that the dog park was more effective than online dating services for finding a potential love interest. And then there's the source. It's sandwiched in there, so you've got a bit about context before. It's being used to illustrate that context, and then you go on to explain after that how it's relevant or useful for your own research. So that is the solution to avoiding hit and run quotations. And I believe this is all of the common problems that I've encountered over the years. I'll go ahead and call it a night, or I'll go ahead and stop with this. And if you have questions, post them in the forum or email me. Thank you.